Welcome back, book nerds. This is Library Card, the show for people who want to think deeply about the books they read and get inspired to read more. I'm Megan Glyona. I'm here with Brian Brinkman and RJB. And today we're going to be talking about my favorite book that I read in 2023, Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. But before we do that, we have two orders of business today. First, we're going to talk about the news from the literary world, and then we're going to talk about what we're currently reading. And then we'll get into our in-depth conversation about Klara and the Sun. And I want to start out today with our news because it's kind of sad. An important American writer passed away this weekend. Tom Robbins was a best-selling author, a counterculture hero with an ability to craft poetic observations about humanity and the world around us, and whose own life seems like it was as interesting as his novels. His motto was joy in spite of everything. RJ, I know you're a big fan of Robbins. Would you like to share a few words?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that maybe he is like a writer who's designed for people in their 20s, because I feel like that he
Hmm.
really defined my 20s as like a reader. Like just because I took all these AP classes and college classes and read all the books and classics, but it was like the first writer I discovered who took writing out of this like you know interesting but academic or classic spaces and just like made it fun and loose and insightful and whimsical. And I mean, he's just like, his writing was just such great attention to detail, but also the details were just like weird and wacky. It's such a great combination of being smart and being funny, and all of his books are great. There's one quote that he gave to NPR in 1994. Can I read it to you guys? Because it helps
Yes,
like
please.
show this person. He said, "I do a lot of useless reading and read a lot of science magazines. I subscribe to about 30 magazines, and every Thursday night I put on a satin smoking jacket that I bought in a secondhand store on Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles and light up a big Cuban cigar and read magazines. And it's as if your mind is a Geiger counter. Every now and then something makes a loud ping." Um, and then he like also talked about how he started taking LSD, and the kind of his novels kind of reflect that hallucinatory stuff. I mean, the first book that he wrote, Another Roadside Attraction, is about like the mummified body of Jesus Christ turning up at a roadside hot dog stand. Like, that's the premise. So like he just, I mean, it's just so crazy, but he has these, like, every sentence that he wrote, he really valued language, and even if it was weird and totally bizarre, like his sentences were just like perfect. It's crazy. So
Some of the
I
quotes that
recommend
you're
people listen.
sending this weekend were amazing. It sounds to me a little bit like Vonnegut. I haven't read Robbins, but I'm looking forward to that. But it has seems that kind of lightness, but also like masking like a depth to it.
Yeah, and like the way you talked about, you know, the kind of writer who's perfect for you in your 20s when you're starting to understand the world on a larger level and you're starting to read in a different manner than you would have in high school. I had that experience with Vonnegut where his humor, his combination of philosophy and science fiction really just hit me in such a immense way that I don't know. I feel like I need to read some more Robbins. What would you recommend, RJ, to your fellow hosts here as well as to the listeners?
I think my favorite book of his is Skinny Legs and All, or Fierce Invalids Home from Hot Climates, which are both just, if you like read a summary of his books, it just won't make any sense because it's weird and totally bizarre, but both great books. Skinny Legs and All is like kind of about the Middle East and about like the Arab Israeli conflict, but like only in as it relates to shoes. It's just like it's hard to explain. You just have to dive into one, and then it'll work.
That's what
As it
I'm going to read
relates to
next, I think.
shoes. I like that.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
you're gonna
yeah,
go there, Megan?
yeah. I feel like it's the moment. You have to seize these moments when these things happen. It feels kind of serendipitous, and I'm going to need something light after what I'm reading now. So I think this sounds perfect. So I'm excited. I'm excited to do that. Maybe we can talk about one of his books on the show.
I would love that. I would
Yeah,
love
me
that. I would
too.
like to go back and reread. I don't reread a lot of books. So do you guys reread books? I don't really reread. So I'm like, if I went back, I'd have to reread, which is seems fun.
I'm
I'm
rereading
doing
for
the
the first
reread.
time in my life now, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna do one this year for East of Eden. I'm very excited. But yeah, I don't typically it doesn't get the same treatment as movies and albums do.
Having reread 2 of my favorite books in the past 2 years, it's definitely valuable, especially at this age because they hit so differently. And unlike Brian, I can't remember anything that I read, so definitely can't remember things I read 20 years ago.
I told you both, I think, that I accidentally reread a book last year. I did not mean to.
I did too.
I was like reading and I'm like, oh shit, I've read this before. So that's great.
At least you figured it out. I didn't read it. I
Maybe.
read A Gentleman in Moscow, and I did not know that I had read it earlier.
Wow.
Which
Which is
is
a pretty like
I
I mean,
know.
I love that book. I can't believe that
I
you
do
did it.
too. It's very specific too. It's not like
Yeah.
a story you
Yeah,
forget
the tone
Yeah.
of that book, like you've never read anything else like it, type of thing.
Yeah. God, so
until
good.
you have and you forget it, I guess. Yeah. I think I had a 1-year-old and like a 2.5-year-old when I read that book. So I think that's where I was.
Then you're free of all counts.
Exactly. I was excused. RJ, what are you reading now? I can't keep up with you. What's your latest?
My latest is The Berry Pickers, which is sort of it's like a little bit of a murder mystery, socially conscious murder mystery. It's fun. It's interesting. It's like about kind of in an Indian and white relations in Nova Scotia and Maine in the 60s through the present day. It's about a girl who goes missing, but it's good. It's a debut novel. And yeah, I'm enjoying it. It's going fast. I just finished Ben Lerner's book 1004, which does have some clock references. So I mean that. And Brian, I know you've read Ben Lerner. Like I'd never read his book before, but it was fucking wild. It was like a real trip reading that book. It's kind of like a book that's talking about writing a book while during the book, and he's writing these essays that also are part of the book while he's like telling you the story of writing. It's wacky.
Yeah, I just finished his debut, Leaving the Atocha Station, which is very much like that. It's a 20-something on a fellowship abroad program, writing like a large project while he's writing a book about writing that large project and writing about not writing that large project. So it's very much like what is happening like from a psychosis standpoint as I'm like going through life and I'm reflecting it through my writing. He's pretty fascinating.
Maybe all of his books are actually about him trying to like having anxiety about writing books. Is that right?
Totally. Yes.
Is that the other one?
Definitely.
You
It
read a
seems
different
like
one,
it.
right, Megan?
I read maybe half of the Topeka School, which is I never abandon books, and I did abandon that. I don't really know why. I just couldn't lock into it. But I'm definitely going to read Ben Lerner this year. But what should I read if I should read one? What should I start with?
Well, I'm going to give you 1004 tomorrow.
Okay, so I'll have that.
I'm going to
But
hand it to
Brian,
you.
what do you think I should start with?
So I haven't that's the only one I haven't read of his. I have heard from a buddy of mine who's read all three that is his best.
Oh,
I
okay.
found Atocha Station to be much more accessible than the Topeka School. However, I found the overall like resolution of the Topeka School to be more rewarding, I would say, by the end of it. But
Okay.
I put that book down for about 3 months as well. I think that one was his closest attempt at a traditional novel where he kind of removed himself from the experience. And there were a few B plots within there that you needed to like have them come back around, and you would have liked in the reading of the book for them to come around a little bit sooner to at least like keep you going. Because I struggled with that one, but I found Atocha to be great. I think I trust 90% of RJ's recommendations. So I would say, 90% you should read 1004. I'm going to read that at some point here soon. So, we'll all be on the same page.
But RJ, you were a little mixed on 1004, no?
Yeah, I was a little mixed. I think ultimately I'm glad I read it.
Okay. This is interesting.
I'm happy to send it to you, give it to you if you want it.
Okay, yeah, I'll take it.
Okay.
I'm never going to turn away a book.
Fair.
Brian, what are you reading right now?
Well, I'm finishing Long Island Compromise, which I'm very excited to. RJ keeps telling me you're almost there. You're almost there. Apparently, there's a great big reveal that is gonna. It's been this like joyous, like candy neurosis type of book. It's just like you you just like keep eating like peanut M&Ms because you're stressed out type of thing. Like that's how this book feels. Just like 5 more pages, but every page makes me feel awful. It's great. I'm really enjoying it, and I've got a couple ideas about what my next fiction book is going to be that I'm going to have to run by you guys because I need full approval. And then we're listening to the biography of Ronald Reagan by Max Boot, which is
Mm.
outstanding, fascinating. I'm doing that thing where, I've got to learn, what does the other side say about American history? What do the people I disagree with say about it? And we're very much in that moment in time right now for me. And it's really enlightening. It's very illuminating. Ronald Reagan thought that there were plenty of trees on Earth and didn't see any reason for us to expand national reserves. But then he created the Redwoods National Park. He's full of contradictions. He signed a bill into law basically legalizing abortion in California in 1967, more liberal of a decision than any politician in U.S. history. But he was also just like, he had his facts and you had your facts, and his facts were right because they were his facts. It's just fascinating. Had no friends either. No friends, not a single friend. And then I'm still going through Tarantino's Cinema Speculation, which is lighting up my world for movies in the 70s that shaped his career. I just watched Deliverance, which was wild.
It's crazy.
So yeah, we're just constantly busy. We're just rotating endlessly between fiction, nonfiction, and back.
I like that. I've
How about
heard
you,
very
Meg?
good things about that Reagan book.
It's incredible. I cannot recommend it enough as a block of American history.
Yeah, I'm deep in American history right now, so it'll probably be a little while before I go back to it. I'm still reading These Truths. We talked about it a little bit last episode. It's an 800-page monster that spans American history from 1492, and I've got about 250 pages left. So FDR just passed away, World War II has just ended, and I just keep thinking about how much of American history seems to come back to this idea of original sin. And just been thinking so much about that. And, this country has these like beautiful ideals, but can never really seem to move past how it sacrificed those ideals to keep the wheels turning. And even the best people have to make sacrifices, and it's always the same group of people that are sacrificed. But it's truly inspiring just thinking about like the incredible minds that have worked to make this country better. And she does such an incredible job. It's written by Jill Lepore, of recognizing and making clear the contributions of women and Black Americans. And it's something that she really does really well. And it's astounding. The book is overwhelming and inspiring and incredibly sad all at the same time. And I'm loving it. And yeah, I'm going to be sad when it's done, but also feel a big sense of relief. So it's a monster. I just want to finish it sometime soon. And the other book that I'm reading as a treat to myself is this beautiful collection of poetry. It's by V. Penelope Pelazon. It's called A Gaze Hound That Hunteth by the Eye. A slightly pretentious title, but the collection is really intimate, really sweeping at the same time, often like in the same metaphor. It's an expansive collection of poetry that tackles like subjects really deftly, but she's able to move through time and space in a way that I've just never read in a poet. So it's inspiring and a fun little treat after reading a lot of really dense American history. Hopefully
Love it.
next time we record, I'll be done reading These Truths. That'd be nice. I hope so. All right, should we get into Klara?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Yeah. So introduce this book a little bit, Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's the 8th novel from the Nobel Prize-winning British author who was born in Japan, but he's lived in the UK for most of his life. And the story is narrated by an artificial friend, Klara, and she's an AI designed to provide companionship to children. The story takes place from some unknown time in the near future when the world has become very polluted and children learn mainly remotely. And the story begins with Klara sitting in the store waiting to be chosen, and it follows her as she is bought by a sick teenager, Josie. And so we watch as Klara creates meaning and tries to understand what it means to be human. I wanted to start this conversation. I read a really interesting quote from when he won the Nobel Prize, and I think it's a good place to launch from. The person who was introducing him said that Ishiguro wrote novels of great emotional force that uncovered the abyss beneath our illusory sense of connection with the world. So I wanted to get your take on him being a writer who's known for writing novels with really great emotional force. Even if you haven't read any of his other books, the fact that he wrote a novel from the perspective of something that has to discover and interpret and learn emotion, and how he uses this conceit to demonstrate a major theme of the book. And I wanted to hear if that resonated with you, and kind of the balance of this quote, of this idea that he's this emotional writer who also wrote a book about someone who, or something that really has no emotion, and the distance from that.
I mean, I think that is inherently like that risk that he takes there, to take an inorganic object who is programmed to act a certain way, who interprets feeling, interprets emotion, learns, essentially by observation, and has to act in a way that like carries responsibility, but also empathy, and over time seems to discover what it means to love someone, and but also like kind of falling short in some cases as well, because her interpretation of what love means is still slightly skewed by the fact that she is ultimately a machine. um like that's the biggest feeling of all, and that's like the feeling that like I think we take for granted at times, and it's a feeling that um you like, as a human, you can't really fake it. Like, you either feel it or you don't, and yet at the end of the day, like, that so much of our world, so much of the relationships we have, so much of the way that we operate through the world depends on who we love, how we love, why we love, but then to transfer that into a machine that is essentially considering theme based around code. I don't know. It reduces and also like explores this concept of love in a very scientific way that I think um, he was more or less successful at. It threw me for a loop while reading it, but it's also like um, I don't know if he would have gotten the same book had he approached it through a different character's eyes while there being an AF in the room with all the characters. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but like,
Mhm.
for me, um, trying to understand this feeling that through someone who has to learn what this means was just a wild ride.
RJ, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's the most interesting about the book, is that giving um they don't the artificial friend doesn't have the ability to experience the emotional dynamics of humans in the same way, right? So like
Mhm.
giving the giving that distance, and almost like there are like parts where Klara sees humans interacting in some way and like makes a comment on it in like an overly logical way, which shows the
Mhm.
distance between like which really, like, I think then helps to underscore the point that humans, like, there is no way to like really substitute real human connection and emotion and interaction. And I think like, I mean, we can talk more about like AI generally, but like if you've ever interacted with any of these AI programs, like that's the main thing, right? Is like there's no there's no understanding of like how human dynamics and emotion actually work. So in that sense, I think it's cool because it gives him the ability to it almost gives you more freedom to be like, this is how this thing that's not human sees humans, which I think then helps when there are those moments, which are few and far between. They hit more powerfully.
Yeah, I read an interview with him, and he was saying that by making the narrator non-human and so removed, it forces you to think about, to see yourself from outside of yourself, just like what you're saying. And yeah, I think Brian, related to what you were saying, I definitely think a huge theme of this book is love and where does love exist? And for that idea, she has a quote. Klara says, there was something very special, but it wasn't inside Josie. It was inside those of who loved her. And so this idea of like, when you love someone, it exists inside of you. And it doesn't, and that's what's really interesting is that Klara is attempting to, because her reason of being, her creation, she was created to kind of cure loneliness. Like for someone, like that's what she's meant for. So she's trying to understand how humans do that, and that's by loving each other. And so she's trying to emulate love, but she is putting together this idea that love is confusing to her because love, people would choose to be lonely even when they love someone. So like when the mother Helen of Rick wants to send him off to school, Klara is confused because the mother loves Rick, but she's okay with him leaving her, which doesn't make sense to Klara. But then when Klara starts to understand that when you love someone, it's a feeling inside of you, and it doesn't necessarily have to do that you're okay with what if they're outside of you. It's fascinating. And I think also the idea of is all love good or equal, and the different forms that love takes. So in the book, there's different forms of love. There's like the love from the parents, which is overprotective and anxious and sometimes almost selfish. Like Josie's mom does things that, and she's made choices to try to have this like genetically perfect child that has made her children sick, which was potentially a selfish choice. And then there's the love from Klara that is really generous and open and curious. And then there's Rick and Josie's love for each other, which is that kind of pure, unknowing, and full of possibilities love. And I think that and then there's this other idea of love, which is, I think, forgiveness. And that's a huge theme, I think, of the book too, is the way that forgiveness is used as a form of love, and how adults seek forgiveness in this book as a relief for kind of the guilt that they have because of choices they've made. And I think that he's really making a larger statement about humans' capacity to forgive and love someone despite choices they've made, which to me makes the novel very hopeful.
It kind of also, I listened to an interview with him where he talked about the origins of this story came from what he wanted to originally write was a children's book. And he ran the plot by his mid-20s daughter, and she said that will terrify children. What is wrong with you? So he started reshaping it into the book that we have here. I was thinking a lot about, because this book is set in the near, slightly dystopian future. And I was thinking about the idea of, you talk about forgiveness. I thought as well about like how to save a person. And there's this sense
Mm.
of like something's gone wrong. We've done something wrong. We don't know how long ago this thing is that went wrong, but something's gone wrong to adjust society. Um, and you think about like the remote learning aspect of it. I think that all parents kind of experienced this during COVID, where suddenly our kids are learning through screens, and you're seeing the psychological impact and the emotional impact that that is having on them. Um, but ultimately, like, what are you supposed to do? You're not going to pull them out of these classes. And also, there's this sense of like, well, if we all just fall in line and we all just behave ourselves and we wear masks and we don't go outside for like 6 weeks, this will all be over. And like, we can save them from this. So we have to like slightly torture everyone to get to that point in time. And you get that within this book. And so you get like the forgiveness side of it. You get these parents who are making decisions about the genetic makeup and the educational opportunities that their kids are going to have. And you really get this sense of like kind of bigger picture. Whenever, if it's climate change, if it's AI overrunning our society, whatever it is, like the apocalypse is going to be this slow moving experience that we're all going to live through in stages where things just progressively get worse, but we're going to try to continue hanging on to some sense of normalcy. And the further and further you get into this idea of modernity or even postmodern existence, um, I would imagine every generation is going to feel some sense of regret and sorrow and begging for forgiveness from the next generation who didn't create the world that they live in, but has to live in it and grow up themselves. And then that cycle is just going to be repeated. For me, that was when I thought about this book, because it's so narrow in terms of the information it gives you because of the character that you're learning everything from. As I continue to think about, where is this? When is this? Why is this all happening? I just kept coming back to this sense of regret and almost shame for what we have bestowed upon this next generation. I'm curious if you guys had that.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, yeah. I mean, it's for such a sparse novel, like there's a lot in there, which is part of what makes it compelling, There's like so much happening in like a book that's like pretty short and doesn't actually have a lot of like plot, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like, I guess that's the whole point, is that you're like able to draw all kinds of themes from it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, man, I was thinking about like just the idea of the characters like not really doing anything. There, like, stuff happens, but there's not like actually a lot of plot in this book. So Brian, like what you were just saying is like a totally not, like, you could have just read like a couple paragraphs of something and probably had the same thoughts, but not in the way that they were sparked by like reading this book. You know what I mean? I guess that's the thing that I keep thinking about, is how he was able to like make people think so deeply about so many different things with like almost no, like, once you're done with it, you're like, what was that even about? But then you're left thinking about these like much bigger topics, which I think is just really
Yeah.
seems very hard to do.
Have you ever read Never Let Me Go, his book before this?
No.
I think there might be. Okay, so it's incredible. And it's dystopian, and it's similar though. And it's basically about this world in the future that there are clones, and they're raised to provide organs to other people. So you will have a clone that's made for you, and it takes place, like, the book is narrated by one of the clones, and they don't know. And I don't want to give anything else away, but it's almost a companion piece in the sense that he's really economical and sparse, but he's able to leave you kind of reeling and creating the worlds, which I think to me is something that I thought he did really well in this book, which I imagine can also be frustrating. I think, Brian, maybe this frustrated you a little bit. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think maybe it did. But because he allows his readers to make meaning, it mirrors the way that Klara is making meaning. And I read it described in a review as he's drip feeding you information. And for me, I love to consume art where I have to make meaning or construct things while I'm reading it. And you get to kind of imagine what has happened to our world to get to this place. And I think that's, RJ, what you're saying too. It's like, because you don't know what's happened, he hasn't told you this horrible pollution event happened, this horrible thing happened. You get to kind of imagine that, which is almost scarier and also deepens your experience because you're not being told. In third grade, when I'm teaching writing, I'm always talking to them about showing, not telling. And this is kind of the ultimate of that, really simplified version of it. But I think that it makes you create the meaning, and also kind of creates a distance between Klara and the humans in the book, which also makes you think more broadly and more thematically, as opposed to, like, if you're in the head of one of the human characters, then you start to see from their perspective only. In this way, you're kind of removed from it, which I think is really fascinating. And I think also makes the book feel really lonely, because you're carrying all the emotional weight of the story. because the narrator doesn't have any emotional weight, which there are not many books like that. Where to me, it's kind of a genius writing technique because you're the one carrying all the emotional weight. You're imagining all the emotion, but they're not telling you about it. And so to me, it really mirrors a main theme of the book, which is the loneliness of the human condition, and that everything you're experiencing, you're doing it alone. Even though you connect with other people and you share your life with other people, you're really siloed in everything that you're feeling. And I think having a narrator that's emotionally removed puts that into practice really well.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you said, and like why it frustrated me as well. I think that like I think that the what he was going after, he did about as well as you could. You know, this is clearly a
Mm.
very emotional writer putting himself in a position where he's trying to write in a manner that is a, a non-organic person trying to understand organic feelings. I think that for me, I I feel like I would have gotten what he was going for if there were like Klara segments in the book. But I think the book would ultimately have worked better for me and gave me more connection to what these people were going through and what Clara was going through had I had a little bit more of like an understanding of where we are, why we are where we are.
What do you mean by
And just
Clara segments?
like if the book had had almost like a prologue that was like, this is what the like this is how this world was created. This is like
Mhm.
why this is where we are in time. This is what has led to these AFs becoming manufactured and sent out to people. Because that would have actually given me something to like hold on to. Like for me, I spent so much of the book, and I think you're right. Like as I'm saying all this, I'm like, well, yeah, but that's kind of the point, and of course it's the point. Like like I get the goal he was going after, and I think he did a really strong job of putting you in a position where, like you mentioned a couple minutes ago, this sense of fear because you don't have all the information and you feel really isolated and really lonely because you don't actually know that you're in a house with a family, but you also like don't really understand why the family treats you coldly because you know you're here to replace their daughter essentially. Sorry, spoiler alert. But as I was reading it, it was this like dual step of you're understanding the world through artificial intelligence, brain, and eyes. But also because you're doing that, you're slightly limited in terms of what any sort of consequences are, what any sort of like risk
Mm.
that's being taken in this book leads to. And so I think, you know, he certainly accomplished it. It left me feeling very cold and a little bit like the realization at the end of, you know, what it means to truly love someone. I feel like I've read that before. I haven't read it from this
Mhm.
perspective, but I feel like I've read it before. So it felt like it just reaffirmed something from essentially an aluminum creation that didn't give me like a new perspective. It just reaffirmed something I felt already, but from a slightly different perspective that the whole time I was like, can I just have a little bit more perspective of what's going on here? So I'll pause to let you guys go back and forth at me on this, but that was my biggest issue.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I completely get that, and I think there's a suspension of disbelief when you read this book that you have to
Yeah.
be willing to go on, right? And I'm pretty into that, but if you're
Sure.
not, like, I think it makes so much sense to me as to why it might be frustrating. I'm more kind of willing to accept a story with less that forces me to work harder, but I completely get that, and I take that as a criticism, like, valid for sure.
I thought the first like part of the book was like basically like the kids' book Corduroy. Do you guys read that book to your kids?
Yeah, yeah,
100%.
yeah, the
100%.
I
buttons.
was like,
Yeah, yeah,
this is
absolutely.
like Corduroy. But then it got. I mean, I do think the So Brian, I don't know if this is what you're kind of getting at, but like, if you're looking for the characters and the plot and the kind of like
Yeah.
story to be told to you, it's definitely doesn't do that, and I think when I finished it I felt the same way you did, Brian, which was like cold is a good way to describe it, but I think that's probably the point, and I guess that like
Yes.
made me
Mhm.
start thinking about like, so are we like at the point now where we have to have more books and movies and art generally about how AI is going to like interact with humans? Like, is that like maybe there's more out there than I think, but I feel like it was like a sci-fi thing, and now it's becoming less of a sci-fi thing and more of like life. But this book seems to me to be one of the first that's like come across.
Well, did you ever see the movie Her, the
Yeah,
Spike Jonze movie? I thought about that so much
yeah.
during while I was reading this book. I've seen that movie a few times. I love that movie. I think it's super cool. And
But
that
are we gonna get
idea
more of
of
those, like exponentially more as we get exponentially more AI, or is it like, or do we
probably,
need it
right?
to escape from it? I don't know. I'm not sure I need it.
I
Like,
don't know. I don't know. I don't know that I do either.
I don't really
Well,
want any more.
it kind of leads me back to my thought of like, as we continue down this road, it's going to be a slow moving thing where
Mm,
art is going to start to mirror life and life will start to mirror art. And I mean, you're already seen it. Like a movie like Her is inherently more realistic and tied to the present than Blade Runner or
totally.
2001. This is we're now at a point where there's such a crossover between the two. And I think that this does a really good job of showing like clearly something really big has happened that's impacted humanity and who knows how long ago it was, and clearly we're still in the early stages of manufacturing artificial intelligence that can essentially mimic specific human behavior while also comforting people but still can't. And so like I think to your point, RJ, about like I don't want to read that, like the more and this is why I was so excited for this conversation, because I've spent the last year thinking that I didn't love this book. When like my takeaways were very similar to you guys, I think they just worked slightly differently. Like I read it being like, what I want is the like I want to have the I guess I want to have this story be a part of a larger story rather than the story in and of itself. And I just
Yeah, I
don't think
get
that
that.
that's how this guy writes. And so as a result, like I was left feeling like I got 45% of the story, that if I'd gotten the additional 55%, you really have something classic there. And maybe that's the trick of like, I'm going to make you as the reader build the world in your own head. So like perhaps the way that all of this looked to you in your brain felt better to live in than it did for me, or you enjoyed the experience more than I did. But I was just like, I don't want to live here. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
be here. And like, um,
Yeah, I think it's
yeah,
supposed to make you uncomfortable, I think, which is part of the,
100%.
I think
I
so
think that's part
too.
of the point, right?
But then I think what's strange about it is that I felt very hopeful about it, and I really loved Klara as a narrator. I just found her really fascinating because demonstrating how you create a belief system is amazing to me. And I think that when you
Mm,
watch this AI construct meaning of the world and you realize that that's what humans have done, like, I think thinking about like what outside forces impact that, like what meaning doesn't make sense out of its societal context. Like I thought a lot about religion when I was reading this book because of, the book is called Clara and the Sun, and it's because she believes that, because she's solar powered. So she knows that the sun gives her life, and she believes that the sun can fix Josie. And actually, she believes it does fix Josie. And she begins to pray to the sun and worship the sun and seek out the sun and tell people about the sun. And to me, it was very much a kind of allegory about how humans create reasons of being and something outside of them that gives reason for their life and that can fix things and that can help them solve problems and that can take away the bad things. And I loved that idea of if you took religion out of like the baggage that goes along with it, like the wars and the tribalness of it, and just think about what it really is, this idea of something that has given you life and makes things better. That's what she's found. And to me, that was really incredible to think about. And I was thinking a lot about, I read this book right around the time that I watched Poor Things last
Mm.
year. And that the parallels between it were really interesting to me because in that movie, Bella is this, it's an infant brain put in a woman's body, and she's raised outside of society. And so she has none of the societal expectations of what women should be like and what people should be like. And so she develops this very organic sense of being, and it's very off putting and often drives her into situations that are like slightly comical, but also just like you get it because you're like, yeah, that's exactly how I would feel if nobody told me I couldn't do that all the time. And I felt like that's a similar feeling of how people or things would create meaning outside of contexts. And I just thought a lot about that after reading this book.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because I think like the stuff that you took from it, Megan, is so much different than what I remember from reading it. And it was a year ago that I read it, and I just was like going back to reading summaries and whatever. But I found most fascinating, maybe it's because I have just like a simpler brain, but I found most fascinating the way
Hardly.
that the humans and the AF were like interacting. Like there's like one part in the book where they like break the fourth wall or whatever, where it's like, are you a guest or do I treat you like a vacuum cleaner? Which is
Yeah.
like,
Mhm.
but that's like the only, I think there's maybe a couple other parts where they like acknowledge, like, we don't really know if this is like, are you supposed to treat this thing like it's like a person or a machine? Which I find like that the lack of resolution about that was like bothering me. Cause I'm like, I want to know, is this like in this future, is this thing like a vacuum cleaner or is it more like a member of the family? And I think part of the, like he doesn't tell you what that is, partially
It'll
to
be
like
different for everybody, right?
yeah, it'll
Don't
be
you
different for
think?
everybody, and it's also like it makes it much more creepy and weird because it's like we don't know what it's going to be like, and like to me that
Yeah.
was kind of like part of the lasting impact of it. And maybe that's just back to what I was saying earlier, which is like, do we have to like think about this stuff all the time? But I appreciate your takeaways and your like hopeful takeaways, because I think I was more like I definitely thought that it was a touching like way to wrap up the book. Like I thought that when I ended it, I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. It was cool. Um, but I was thinking much more throughout about how this like inevitable and urgently soon situation is like supposed to be handled by humans. Like that's the part that was like kind of the most lasting for me.
I mean, that makes me think that we've already experienced something on this level when the iPhone was created and smartphones began to be unveiled. This
Totally.
idea of like, I mean, I remember going over to a friend's house the night he got an iPhone, and we literally just sat on his back patio, like scrolling through it and like being fascinated by the apps and the connection you could have with the outside world and what you could use it to do. And over the last, what is it, 17, 18 years now, it's become like a companion for people and a source of information, but it's also got this really kind of sinister dark side to it that
Mhm.
we are currently living with a lot of the ramifications of having all this information in your pocket and having this ability to just like at any point, no matter where your head is at, connect with the outside world. So like, is it a companion for you? Is it where you read and where you get all of your information, or is it just like something that you're supposed to use to call people and occasionally use? And we're debating that. We're trying to figure that out. And I think you're absolutely right, RJ, that you get that out of this. Um, because I'm remembering, wasn't one of the neighbors just fascinated by the idea of AFs and just questioning Klara throughout the book and like kind of treating her almost like a science experiment?
Yeah.
But then other people were treating her like an actual person.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets down to the root of like, because then it starts to bring in layers of racism and race
Mhm.
relations and this idea of like, well, you're a person, but you're a person who has this skin color, who looks this way. So, like, do I treat you normally the way that I am because we're just two humans, or are we supposed to have some sort of differentiation? So, I mean, I guess the more I think about it, the deeper and the more like impressive it is that he did all of this in a book that's this size. And I was able to read in a matter of days. Um, but I still can't get over the fact that I needed to know more. That's really all it is.
I
I
think,
totally appreciate that,
yeah.
and I think that he does think a lot about this idea of servitude. His other books are like that too. His most famous book, Remains of the Day, is all about a butler and this idea of servitude and class and
I need to
how
read that.
people. Yeah, I need to too. It's supposed to be incredible. But I think he talks a lot about that, and there's a lot about class in this book too, about, Rick, who was not lifted, and choices he has to make to try to better his life because he's not lifted. But I did wanna circle back to what you were both talking about the iPhone and about this being in our lives now, because we were talking offline a little bit about this, about how children are different now because of phones and technology, and teenagers. I have 2 in my home, and they go out so much less than I did, and there's less sex than, kids are having less sex, 20-year-olds are having less sex. There's just a sense of having so much already right in your hand, and I think that it is definitely something that he's commenting on, um, for sure, and it's amazing because this book was almost finished by the time the pandemic was hit, but he really shadowed a lot of these themes of like isolation and parents being anxiety ridden and people divided by class in this world that's scary and scared to go out in, and people are driven by fear, and it's, to me, it's pretty incredible that he was imagining this prior to it happening.
Can I ask you a question, Megan? Because you know this author better. I feel like every single review mentioned his other books, which I don't like. I mean, all reviews mention authors' other books, but they all the reviews of this book talk about his other books as a continuation or like a way of picking up where the story left off. And I feel like that's pretty unique. That there's like this is a like almost like you have to know his other stuff to understand it sort of thing, which I feel like other book reviews, it's like this person wrote this and now they're writing this, but it's like it's within the context of the actual content of the book, which I feel like except for like sequels and prequels and all that, you don't see that very much. But it seems like it's all intertwined to the point where you have to understand a few of his books to understand the whole picture.
Yeah, I get that sense. I think in an interview I read, he said that he writes the same book over and over again, just differently. That he's tricking everybody. That he writes the same themes, and I think he's definitely someone who's a world creator and writes in a certain way. It reminds me a little bit of Murakami in that there's a sense of a distance and a remove that is very unique, and also I think his books do thematically build on each other. Like I said, I've only read, Never Let Me Go, but that one is definitely related to this, and reading a little bit about Remains of the Day, it seems very much linked up to a lot of these same ideas. So. I think that some authors too just inhabit a certain world of themes that are better understood when you've read a lot of them.
Vonnegut's like that, where he
Yeah.
takes World War II and science fiction and kind of spins it out into 10 different books. He also, Ishiguro, in an interview I watched with him, mentioned what you just said, Meg, that he kind of takes what his last book was, and his next book is almost a rewrite of it. So you get that like 8 times. And his last book came out 6 years prior, The Buried Giant, which follows an elderly British couple living in a fictional post-Arthurian England in which no one is able to retain long-term memories. They have dim memories of having a son, and they decide to travel to a neighboring village to seek him out. Which, like, that sounds like a slightly askew world to what we
Yeah.
are experiencing here. Obviously, different time, different place, but like the sense of a relationship between parents and their kids in a challenging environment where the parents have lost something and
Mm.
they're trying to do right by their kids, but they can't quite. And their kids are growing up and experiencing the world in a completely different way as a result of, the world that they created prior to. Um, I don't know. So I feel like the more we talk about him, the more I want to go through and read more of what he's done to get a perspective of this book compared. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting approach.
I
Yeah,
kind of
he's
want to
really
read.
interesting.
Sorry, Megan.
Go
I really
ahead.
want to read Remains of the Day because it seems like
Me
a
too.
similar themes, but with humans, which I just think
Mhm.
is
Yeah,
like
and
kind of interesting to think about.
he won the Nobel Prize after writing that, and it was made into a movie. Anthony Hopkins. I mean, that book was a massive success. So we should read it, and then we can circle back and say what we think about it. Just add it to our list of books that we have to read.
Add it to the list.
Yeah.
Add it to
I
the
have a
list. I mean,
question for both of you
yeah,
about
yeah.
these types of books. When you're reading a book like this that's so thematic, and I think Northwoods and Orbital are a little bit similar, are you thinking about the themes when you're reading, or are you lost in the story and then you think about the themes later? Which is it for you?
The more I read, the more the themes become apparent. I think it's the same with the more you consume of something, the more you represent you recognize patterns and whatnot.
Mm,
Um, but I also find this experience, and I'm curious you guys have it, where like I'll read something. I typically don't read a lot about a book while I'm reading it, mainly because I don't want spoilers,
same.
but also because like I just kind of want to experience it myself. And then I'll go and I'll usually read like the Wikipedia page. I'll read a couple reviews. I'll try to find an interview with the author on YouTube. Um, listen to some reviews, and I'll have that experience of like, oh, I totally got that. I just I couldn't formulate it when I was reading the book and didn't know where the plot was ultimately going. So like hearing him talk about this, hearing you guys talk about this is like, okay, I understood what I was feeling throughout this. Like I understood the themes, but you're trying to keep up with a plot that could take a left turn that you just aren't expecting. That I'm always kind of just like along for the ride in that standpoint.
Yeah, I would
How about
say
you,
like
RJ?
I think I'm almost always thinking about the themes as I'm reading because I think it's part of the flow of the book, you know? Like to me it's part of it's one of the layers of like the book as I'm reading it. It's like what is the like where are you going with this not just from a story standpoint but also like what are you trying to communicate beyond the story, which almost all books are. I feel like the ones where I don't pick up themes might be like the ones that are like a murder mystery or something where like there was like a theme of something that I didn't notice because I like read it fast and was trying to figure out who killed who or whatever. But
Yeah.
and I feel like Brian, your point is though is a your nuance on it is important because when you said like the more you read, it's kind of like listening to music. Like you can hear when you listen to an album, if you've listened to hundreds and hundreds of albums, you can listen to an album once and kind of like understand it better than if you don't listen to very much music. I think it's like a similar. I feel like it's a similar thing. I think the more you read, the more apparent those themes are. The earlier, like as you're going through the process. At least for me. I don't know.
I
Megan,
asked this
what's yours?
question.
Yeah.
Well, I asked this question because I actually don't think I think about themes when I'm reading a book. I think I'm like completely lost in the story.
Mhm.
And I'm the same with movies. And so now I'm going to pay attention to this more. It's going to be very meta, but I think when I read, I'm really just completely in this world. I'm very visual, so I think I'm always just imagining what's going on, like it's a movie inside of my head. And then afterwards, I think about it, and that's when I start to kind of understand what the themes might be. And so Yeah, I can't tell, but I really think that I'm just not thinking about themes. When I'm reading a book, I'm thinking more about what it feels like to be a character, or what it looks like in the room, or what it smells like, or if I've had an experience like that, or I wish I could write this, something like that.
Hmm.
But I don't think until after I really
Hmm.
think about it, which is really why I've loved being able to talk to you both about books, because it's deepened my understanding thematically of books, because I think talking about it and thinking about it more is really helpful for me.
I think the way that you described your takeaways from this book are like so different from mine and Brian's that that's like what's cool about different ways of processing it. And
Mhm.
and like we were texting about Honora, and I think like the end of Honora, the way you described the themes that you took away from it, I think when I was watching the end of Honora, and we won't spoil the ending, but I was just sort of like, I don't know, I don't really understand what happened. But so I think in movies I don't do the same thing that I do in books. I don't think I'm like looking for those deeper themes.
Oh, that's interesting. You're
But I
more
don't,
lost in the story.
yeah, and I don't watch as many movies. So like maybe it is about partially about that. But
Yeah, like
I
about
also don't
fluency. Mhm.
and I also don't think about stuff afterwards very much. Maybe that's like a bad maybe it's something I should like try to adjust. Like I move on to the next thing and I'm like, that was cool, that was fun, that was interesting.
Yeah.
Like I'm starting something new. I don't know.
Well, it's a
Not a lot of
total.
reflection except for something like this,
Mhm.
I
like
mean,
this
I think
podcast.
we're all doing the reflection through these episodes, which I think is interesting because like I remember finishing this book and picking up another book, and I think I read Northwoods right after this. So like
Mm.
I was immediately taken by it. That book obviously has a lot of like the contextual world building that I'm looking for, while also providing an air of mystery and you
Yeah.
figure it out kind of as you're going through it. Um, but like the more we talk about this, the more I realize like a lot of the fears that I have about where we're at from a societal standpoint right now, where we're going, are kind of in this book in a really powerful and kind of horrifying way. Like one of the things that like when I think about like a lasting image from this book, and when I think about this book in my head, it is looking out of the store window to a nondescript city street where people are going about their day. Some are sick. The sun barely reaches the street for most hours of the day. And like that's a pretty haunting image, but it's also pretty accurate in terms of like modernity taking over us. Um, I think as well, and again, like when I say all like anything critical here, I think that I mean this guy was up for the Booker. He's won the Nobel Prize. Like, who am I to tell him how to write a book? Like, let's be realistic here. Like, he clearly knows what he's doing. But for me, when I'm reading this, like, I almost think that there were times where it's like, okay, I get it. You can write from Clara's perspective, but
Mm.
Clara's perspective is also that of a totally ignorant child, and so there's something effective about the way he's doing that, but it's also just not so much that like because I'm reading a book right now where like I don't like any of the main characters, but I can't stop picking the book up. Like I felt like I had to like work to get myself to continue reading because I was like, do I
Mm.
really want to be told what love is from the perspective of a child?
Interesting.
Hmm.
Which is very much of a me thing. Like that's not a criticism on him.
I think like your comparison to Poor Things, Megan, is appropriate just in response to what you were saying, Brian, because without that perspective, like the Mark Ruffalo character in Poor Things wouldn't be like he's like so awful because of the contrast with like that her character like doesn't know anything. So it like it makes everything else around it different
Yes.
because there's so much like of a lack of perspective. I feel like that's maybe part
Mm.
of it.
See, I like
Yes.
want to know what it would be like. I want to know about love from someone who is not tainted and who has not been conditioned to love a certain way, or a
Hmm.
certain.
Mhm.
I think that, like, I loved Poor Things because I was like, I'm constantly trying to understand how my perspective is shaped by being a woman, and
Mhm.
by expectations, and it's the same for being a man. Like, there are societal expectations that are placed on all of us that change who we are and what we want and choices we make. And I'm constantly trying to figure out which of those I need to follow and which of those I don't, and which of them I don't really believe, and which of them have changed me in ways I don't like. And movies like Poor Things and books like this make me think about, kind of step outside of myself and say, if I was creating a belief system, if I was thinking about the way I want to love, how would I construct it from the ground up? And that's what this book made me think of more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally fair, and it is interesting that, like, but even at the same time, like, Clara was kind of taught that she's there for emotional support, and then she,
That's
like,
true.
meets this girl and realizes, like, "Well, I'm here for your emotional." So, like, even there, like, there's some, like, her love is
Expectation.
still somewhat tainted. Um, One thing I kept thinking about, and we've kinda danced around this topic, it's a bit blasphemous based on the podcast at hand, but, whatever. Um, when I finished it, I started doing my whole thing where I look up, okay, what do other people think of this book? What is it? Did I miss anything? And I came across that this book is a movie in production right now, starring Jenna Ortega as Clara and Amy Adams as Josie's mom. Um, I think that this book will work incredibly well as a movie,
Totally.
and
It's so cinematic.
it's so cinematic. And I think when you talk about like RJ, you were talking about, recognizing themes in movies. Like one thing that was a big breakthrough for me watching movies over the last couple of years was understanding that the way a director shoots a scene, colors it, the imagery that you get, the perspective that you get from the camera is essentially telling the story in and of itself. And I think that this is a book that could tell you 10 pages of what the book tells you in one shot, and gives
Totally.
you the, like, full perspective. And if they restrain themselves and really limit it to dialogue and to, like, these cold, quiet conversations between Josie and Clara and Josie's mom when she's trying to figure out exactly, like, who this person is in her home and what she means in this home, and the kind of the betrayal of Josie throughout the book when they're going to get her portrait drawn, um, all of that, I I personally think will come across in a movie in a way that will hit on an emotional level that, like, I'm looking for from this book, but found myself walking away from the book being, once again, like, I just need something more.
The light has to be perfect for this movie. Like,
Yes.
it's gonna either be amazing or not right at all, but I think it'll be amazing if they have the right cinematographer. But, like, there's like a cold light at times, like you're talking about that street, and then there's like a bright, warm light, like when the sun comes into the room and, like, lights up the room, and, like, Clara thinks it's saving Josie. Like, yeah, I think it's gonna be really powerful as a film. Will you watch it, RJ? Will you
Yeah,
watch
I'll
the
watch it.
movie?
Yeah, of course. Anything. I watch all the movies. I would watch it. I would definitely
It'll
watch
be
it.
good. I've talked a lot about books and and other movies that I think it's similar to. Do you have any, either of you, that you want to share, books or movies that you think this is like, or you'd recommend if people liked this?
I mean, the book that I found this closest to is a very different type of book, but was Infinite Jest, which was written in the mid 90s, similar to this, about, like, the ramifications of our collective and societal decision making in the very near future.
Mm.
That book, which takes into account this direct into the home sense of entertainment and what that ultimately does to people. This book is a little bit more, I mean, obviously, this is much sleeker and is
Yeah.
essentially editing out all of the context that David Foster Wallace includes. Um, but it does have that sense of, like, we are becoming more and more every day not necessarily slaves to technology, but we just require technology to comfort us and to be there for us in ways that at some point will become a dependence we probably cannot rid ourselves from. Who knows how long we are from that, but it's coming.
You don't think we're already dependent on our phones?
Yeah, but I think it's slightly different because you still have the control. Whereas when you start to bring in artificial intelligence that can project its own ideas onto the world and that can fill in the blanks in the way that, like, I guess if you think about like how Google was, like I was in high school when Google came about, and like suddenly we had to relearn from teachers how to research for papers. Like it was
Yeah.
no more going to libraries like, how do you use Google to do this? And that sort of experience has now gotten to the point where, like, if you don't know anything, if you don't know something, you just look it up. And 20 years ago that was different.
But I think with like in terms of social media, they're already telling people what to think and controlling this stuff. And it's all based on, they can tell what you're spending more time looking at. And so they give you that. They listen to what you're saying. And just thinking about how it affects like my teenage daughters, it's fascinating. I would say that everybody, like I am definitely addicted to my phone.
So I have a question for you guys now.
Mhm.
Because I've willingly gotten off of social media because of that reason. Like I felt that, and I don't want anything to do with it. I'd rather have like one-to-one conversations with people. Um, would you want to have an AF for your child? Like reading this book, is this the type of thing you'd want to bring in your home?
No fucking way. No way. No way.
Definitely not.
No
Definitely
way.
not.
Not even
I'm
if like
so
all the neighbors are doing it and like it's like a clear guide to like your
Well,
children's success.
what will happen is if everybody has one, you won't have a choice. But just like your phone, you could try to like keep your kid off a phone. I tried so hard. And then COVID happened. And it was like, I just had to cave and give her the phone when she was in 7th grade instead of 8th, like I swore I would do. I think it's very hard. But I also don't think I'm addicted to my phone because of the social media. I'm addicted to the sense of connection that I get through communicating to my friends on my phone.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I don't even like have the like lights where you like tell the internet to turn like dim your
Same.
lights. Like I like draw I've drawn
I
the
don't like
line. Like
Alexa.
I
I'm not
don't
gonna
even
have
like
that.
Alexa is like kind of
Get out
freaking
of
me
there.
out.
That's so
Yeah.
creepy.
It seems creepy.
All right, well, we're
Um,
all agreed. No Alexa.
no Alexa. Um, I don't have any books or movies to contribute. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This was like a real one. This is like a real outlier for me.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't usually read dystopian, slightly science fiction novels. That's just not really my thing. But this one, yeah, it
Yeah.
hit me. And I really appreciate you both reading it and talking to me about it because I liked this conversation. And it's interesting to hear what you did and didn't like about the book.
I found this fascinating. I think your guys' experience with it is similar and different to what mine has been, and I think that it only enriches why I read the book in the first place and what I took away from it.
Awesome. Well, our next book that we're going to be talking about next month is a book that all of us absolutely loved. We're going to be talking about Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, one of my all-time favorite authors. Talk about context. Holy shit.
Oh, I was
Oh
just
my
gonna
God.
say,
She's an absolute universe builder in the utmost sense. And it's really exciting to be talking about her book now because she has used the proceeds from this book to create a treatment facility for women in Appalachia, which has just opened its doors. So exciting time for her, and what a way to give back from the success of this book. So I'm excited to talk to you both about that and enter back into that sad and beautiful world of Appalachia for next month.
Oh man, it's gonna be awesome.
I have a friend reading that book on my recommendation, and he texts me every like 3 or 4 days and says, "I don't know why you had me read this book, but I can't stop reading it."
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
Sounds about right.
Exactly.
Oh man, there's so much to talk about. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, that's going to be a rich conversation. Well, thanks everyone. And we hope you'll join us next month. We'll see you soon.